Welcome to OOTO TV. This time we're discussing olive oil, coconut oil, and vinegar effect on health. Welcome, everyone. I'm Bob, your host with this investigation.
And I'm Sue. It's great to be here, Bob, and hello to everyone listening.
Today, Sue, we're really diving into some everyday kitchen items, olive oil, coconut oil, balsamic vinegar, apple cider vinegar, and figuring out how they actually impact our health.
Yeah.
Going beyond the headlines, what's the real story from research and, well, even history?
Exactly, Bob. We're going to unpack the details, look at some, frankly, surprising findings, and maybe see if, traditional wisdom had some things right all along. We'll touch on blood sugar, digestion, heart health, even brain health. It's about getting into the nitty-gritty, the nuances.
Right. And what's really fascinating is looking at these ingredients that have, well, historically verifiable benefits. They're embedded in traditional diets, especially Mediterranean ones. There's real evidence supporting them. Things like better digestion, reduced blood sugar, lower fasting glucose, and diets using them have historically been shown to help with reducing body fat and just boosting overall health. So yeah, let's get into it. Okay, let's kick things off with apple cider vinegar ACV. It's ancient, really. People have used it for ages as a health tonic. But what is it exactly, and what does the science actually say it can do for you, Sue?
Well, Bob, fundamentally, ACV is just apple juice that's gone through fermentation twice. That second fermentation is key because that's what creates acetic acid. That's the main active compound, making up about, 5 to 6%.
Acetic acid, right?
Yeah. And if you get the raw, unfiltered kind, the one that looks a bit cloudy and has that stuff floating in it, often called the mother,
Ah, yes.
that contains natural probiotics, so good gut bacteria, plus antioxidants. And interestingly, a lot of the potential health buzz isn't about the standard nutrients you see on a label, but these other compounds.
Okay, so it's more complex than just vitamins and minerals. What are some of the potential health benefits people are talking about? Where's the research pointing?
One of the stronger areas, Bob, seems to be blood sugar control. Some good analyses of studies suggest ACV might help lower fasting blood sugar. It seems particularly effective when you take it with a meal that's high in complex carbs.
How does it do that?
Well, the thinking is it slows down gastric emptying, basically, how fast food leaves your stomach, and that, in turn, slows down how quickly glucose gets absorbed into your bloodstream.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
But I know experts like registered dietitian Beth Cerrone often add a note of caution here.
Yes, absolutely.
She points out that, while it might help a bit, it's definitely not a magic bullet or a replacement for, a healthy diet, exercise, or medication if you need it. Always best to chat with your doctor, especially if you're already on meds for blood sugar.
That's a crucial point, Bob. It's an add-on, potentially, not a substitute. Now, switching gears slightly, that same big review of studies also hinted that ACV might help with cholesterol.
Oh, interesting. How so?
It suggested it could potentially decrease total cholesterol and triglycerides, maybe even nudging up the HDL, the good cholesterol. This seems especially pronounced in people with type 2 diabetes. But again, the usual caveat applies. We really need bigger, more robust studies to be sure about the cholesterol effects.
Right. What about acid reflux? I know some people really believe it helps them.
Yeah, you hear that a lot anecdotally. The theory often involves the probiotics helping to balance the gut. But according to Cerrone, there isn't really solid scientific evidence to back that up strongly.
So more personal experience than proven science.
Pretty much. Though she does say it's likely harmless for most people if their doctor says it's okay to try.
Okay. And the big one, weight loss. Does ACV actually help you lose weight?
Well, the old idea that acetic acid somehow just burns fat away, that doesn't seem to hold water. However, there is some evidence, like from a systematic review, that ACV can increase feelings of fullness for maybe a couple of hours after eating.
So it might help you eat less overall?
Potentially, yes. There was one study with 120 adolescents and young adults who were overweight or obese, and it suggested ACV might contribute to some decrease in body weight and BMI over 12 weeks. But again, Cerrone clarifies there's no, quote, concrete evidence for long-term appetite suppression.
Got it. And briefly, what about the immune system or cell protection?
That ties back to the fermentation. You get those natural probiotics which can help balance your gut microbiome, and a healthy gut is really linked to a strong immune system. Plus, ACV has polyphenols. Those are antioxidants.
Right, the bodyguards for yourself.
Exactly. They help neutralize free radicals, reducing cell damage, so it's kind of an indirect benefit via gut health and antioxidant action.
Okay, this all sounds potentially interesting, but we absolutely have to talk about the downsides and how to use it safely, because it is acidic stuff.
Oh, absolutely crucial, Bob. That acidity is no joke. It can seriously erode tooth enamel, and once that's gone, it's gone. And drinking it straight, that can burn your esophagus.
Ouch. So dilution is key.
It's non-negotiable. The standard advice is usually about 1 tablespoon mixed well in a good amount of warm water. That really brings the acidity down.
And are there other things people need to be aware of? Interactions.
Yes. It could affect potassium levels, so anyone with low potassium or hypovolemia should probably steer clear. And it can potentially interact with certain medications, things like insulin, diuretics, even some laxatives and blood pressure meds. So talking to your doctor before starting is really important.
Definitely.
And, some people just react badly to the taste or acidity. It can cause nausea or vomiting. Plus, if someone has gastroparesis, where their stomach already empties slowly, ACV could make that worse.
Now, the bottom line on ACV.
It shows some promise, especially for blood sugar, maybe cholesterol, but it's not a miracle cure. It needs to be used carefully, diluted properly, and it doesn't replace the foundations of a healthy lifestyle. Always check with your doctor.
You're listening to OOTO TV Investigation Building on the Past and into the Future. Okay, let's pivot now to coconut oil. So this one really exploded in popularity, didn't it? Touted as a superfood, but then came the backlash, especially regarding heart health. Let's try and unpack the different viewpoints here.
Yeah, coconut oil is a really fascinating case study in nutrition trends and scientific debate.
So on one side, you have this traditionalist view. You look at populations in, say, India, Sri Lanka, Polynesia, Melanesia. They've historically consumed a lot of coconut, often the flesh or squeezed coconut milk, but as part of these overall diets that are very different from ours. Low in processed stuff, high in fiber, lots of fish.
Right, the whole dietary pattern.
Exactly. And studies, like the one on Puka Puka and Tokelau Islanders, found low rates of heart disease even though coconut provided a huge chunk of their calories, like 34 to 63%. But crucially, their overall diets were low sugar, high fiber, leading to low cholesterol generally.
That context is so important.
And there was another study in Samoa suggesting a more traditional eating pattern with coconut was linked to less metabolic syndrome compared to a more Western diet. So this historical evidence, especially in these kinds of traditional societies, really points towards benefits from these types of fat sources within that dietary context.
And that's a really valid point, Bob, looking at the historical use. But from a modern scientific perspective, especially applying it to a typical Western diet, we have to be cautious. Those observational studies in traditional populations are great, but they can't definitively prove the coconut itself was the sole reason for good health. There are too many other factors, confounding variables.
Yeah, the whole lifestyle.
Right. And the big issue science flags is coconut oil's saturated fat content. It's incredibly high, around 92%. Now, it's often marketed as being like MCT oil, medium-chain triglycerides.
You hear that a lot.
But its main fatty acid is lauric acid, C12. And biochemically, it actually behaves more like a long-chain fatty acid. Most of it, maybe 70–75%, gets absorbed via chylomicrons, the fat transporters, not directly into the bloodstream like true MCTs.
Okay, so that distinction matters metabolically.
It does. And when researchers did clinical trials directly comparing coconut oil to other fats, especially unsaturated plant oils, the results were, well, often concerning for LDL cholesterol. Many studies found coconut oil raised total cholesterol and LDL, the bad cholesterol, more than oils like corn oil or olive oil. Some analyses even suggested it led to a less favorable LDL to HDL ratio, potentially increasing heart disease risk.
Okay, so that paints a less rosy picture than the traditional view, but then things got more complicated recently, didn't they, with that UK trial?
Yes. The BMJ open study from Kaw and colleagues in 2017, that one really threw a curveball into the discussion. It was a randomized controlled trial, which is a strong study design.
Right. What did they do?
They took healthy adults and had them consume 50 grams, that's quite a bit, about 3.5 tablespoons of either extra virgin coconut oil, extra virgin olive oil, or unsalted butter every day for 4 weeks.
Okay, comparing coconut oil, olive oil, and butter directly, what happened?
The results were really quite striking, Bob. First off, butter significantly increased LDL cholesterol compared to both coconut oil and olive oil. No huge surprise there, maybe.
Right. Butter often gets flagged for LDL.
But here's the kicker. There was no significant difference in the change in LDL cholesterol between the group eating extra virgin coconut oil and the group eating extra virgin olive oil.
Wow. So coconut oil didn't raise LDL more than olive oil in that specific study.
Not in that study, no. It directly challenged some of those earlier findings. And there's more. Coconut oil significantly increased HDL cholesterol, the good kind, compared to both butter and olive oil.
So it raised the good cholesterol.
Significantly. And perhaps even more surprisingly, coconut oil actually lowered C-reactive protein, which is a marker of inflammation compared to olive oil.
Lowered inflammation compared to olive oil. That's unexpected.
It was definitely an intriguing finding, and just to round it out, there were no significant differences in weight gain, BMI changes, or belly fat changes between any of the three groups.
So what does this all mean? It suggests that maybe lumping all saturated fats together is too simplistic, that the type of fatty acid, how it's processed, like using extra virgin coconut oil and the overall diet, really matter.
I think that's exactly the takeaway, Bob. It's much more nuanced. While major health bodies like the American Heart Association still advise caution with coconut oil because of the general LDL raising effect seen in many studies, this newer research highlights that maybe we need to look deeper than just saturated versus unsaturated. The specific fatty acids, the food matrix, processing, it all plays a role. It's clearly not a simple black and white issue.
You're listening to OOTO TV Investigation, building on the past and into the future.
Okay, so moving from the somewhat debated coconut oil, let's talk about something that enjoys a much more solid reputation. Extra virgin olive oil, EVOO. Especially in the context of the Mediterranean diet. It's often called the gold standard for preventive health.
Absolutely, Sue.
Yeah.
And deservedly so, based on the evidence. EVOO isn't just fat. It's packed with monounsaturated fats, mainly oleic acid making up maybe 70–80%. But crucially, it's also rich in these bioactive phenolic compounds.
Right, the polyphenols.
Yeah, and those are thought to be behind a lot of its well-known anti-inflammatory and antioxidant power.
And when you look at heart health, metabolic health, the Mediterranean diet with EBO as a cornerstone is just consistently linked with lower rates of chronic disease and longer lifespans. The big one everyone talks about is the pre-DIME trial.
Landmark study, huge number of people, right?
Massive, over 7,400 people, all at high risk for cardiovascular problems. And they found that following a Mediterranean diet supplemented with extra virgin olive oil, they suggested around 4 tablespoons a day or supplemented with nuts, led to a 30% lower risk of major cardiovascular events. We're talking heart attack, stroke, or death from cardiovascular causes over almost 5 years.
30%, that's a really substantial reduction. And it wasn't just preventing those major events, correct? There were other benefits, too.
That's right. In subgroups of pre-dimed, they saw significant improvements in things like 24-hour blood pressure readings, lower total cholesterol, and better fasting blood glucose levels.
And the diabetes connection is striking, too. I remember another pre-dimed analysis showed something like a 40% lower risk of developing type 2 diabetes in the group getting the extra olive oil.
Exactly. And it's not just pre-dimed. Other studies, like the Attica study, found similar things. Overweight or obese folks sticking closely to a Mediterranean diet with EVO showed better insulin sensitivity, slightly lower cholesterol, and lower systolic blood pressure.
So these findings, particularly for olive oil, really strongly support what we mentioned earlier, its role in improving digestion, reducing blood sugar, and lowering fasting blood glucose. And the mechanisms are becoming clearer. We know oleic acid can activate certain receptors in the gut, promoting the release of GLP-1, a hormone that helps regulate blood sugar and inflammation. Plus, EVOO encourages beneficial gut bacteria like bacteroids and lactobacillus.
And those bacteria produce short-chain fatty acids, SCFAs.
Right, SCFAs like butyrate. And those SCFAs also activate pathways involved in blood sugar control. It all ties back to that historically verifiable point. Diets, including olive oil, help reduce body fat and improve overall health.
It's a really interconnected system, and the benefits don't stop at heart health. There's growing evidence for cognitive health, too, maybe even helping against Alzheimer's disease.
Yeah, the pre-Dimenivara part of the study found that the Mediterranean diet with EVOO actually improved cognitive scores on tests like the mini mental state exam after about 6.5 years.
And there was a French study, the 3-city study, that linked higher olive oil consumption with lower odds of cognitive deficits.
It's fascinating, and animal studies seem to back this up.
They do. Studies in rodents have shown that EVOO, and specifically a compound in it called oleocanthal, can help reduce the buildup of amyloid plaques, and tau tangles those hallmarks of Alzheimer's in the brain. They also saw improvements in memory and activation of cellular cleanup processes. Really strong neuroprotective effects seem to be at play.
Okay, let's dig a bit deeper into the gut connection you mentioned, Sue. How exactly does EVOO influence our gut microbes and immunity?
It's a really active area of research, Bob. We know EVOO tends to promote the growth of beneficial bacteria, think lactobacillus, bifidobacterium, bacteroids, and increases overall microbial diversity, which is generally seen as a marker of good gut health and better metabolism.
So it feeds the good guys. Does it affect bad bacteria?
It seems to. It shows some antibacterial activity against certain opportunistic pathogens, the kind you don't want taking over.
And how do the phenolic compounds fit into this? You mentioned they're key.
Right. A large portion of those polyphenols, maybe 90–95%, actually escape digestion higher up and make it down to the colon. There, our gut microbes metabolize them into other bioactive compounds, so they act almost like prebiotics, feeding beneficial microbes while also having some antimicrobial effects. Oleic acid itself also seems to influence the gut environment.
And you mentioned those short-chain fatty acids, again, SCFAs like butyrate, acetate, propionate. They're produced by the bacteria feeding on these compounds.
Exactly. And these SCFAs are incredibly important. They're fuel for our colon cells. They help strengthen the gut barrier, keeping unwanted stuff out of our bloodstream. And they modulate the immune system right there in the gut lining, promoting anti-inflammatory responses.
So better gut barrier, less inflammation.
Precisely. And as we touched on, they also directly impact systemic things like blood glucose regulation. It really highlights that gut-brain metabolism connection.
It's amazing how interconnected it all is. So with all these benefits, what's the recommended dose, so to speak? How much EVOO should people aim for?
Well, looking at studies like Pre-Demden, where they saw those significant cardiovascular and cognitive benefits, the intake was around at least 4 tablespoons per day. That's roughly 59–60 milliliters. The European Food Safety Authority also has a health claim suggesting a minimum of 20 grams daily. That's a bit under 2 tablespoons, specifically for protecting blood lipids from oxidative damage.
4 tablespoons sounds like quite a bit, but achievable in dressings, cooking.
Definitely. It aligns with how liberally it's used in traditional Mediterranean eating patterns.
Okay, Sue, let's try and synthesize all of this. We've covered a lot of ground.
We have. So for apple cider vinegar, the takeaway seems to be some promising signs, especially for blood sugar and maybe cholesterol, possibly some weight management and immune support help. But, and this is a big but, use it carefully. Always dilute it. Check with your doctor first because of potential side effects and interactions. It's a potential tool, not a magic potion.
Right. Then coconut oil, a real mixed bag. Clearly beneficial in its traditional dietary context. In a Western diet context, the science has been debated, with older studies raising LDL concerns. But that newer BMJ open trial complicates things, showing it might not raise LDL more than olive oil, and it could boost good HDL and lower inflammation. So the verdict, it's more nuanced than just calling it a bad saturated fat. The type and context really matter.
Exactly. And finally, olive oil, specifically extra virgin. It really holds up as a nutritional star, especially within that Mediterranean diet framework. The evidence for its benefits on heart health, metabolic health, brain function, and gut health is pretty extensive and robust.
So the big picture theme that keeps emerging, Sue, is that none of these are standalone miracle cures, right?
Absolutely not. The most powerful effects seem to come when they're part of a whole healthy eating pattern, like the Mediterranean diet rich in whole foods, plants, fish, where these oils and vinegars are naturally integrated components, not isolated supplements.
And we need to state clearly, the historical benefits of olive oil, coconut oil, balsamic vinegar, and apple cider vinegar in the human diet are traditional due to positive support with evidence in Mediterranean society and similar traditional cultures.
Yes. And building on that, these ingredients, particularly within such balanced diets, are associated with improved digestion, reduced blood sugar, reduced fasting blood glucose,
And the overall reduction of body fat, contributing to improved human health, which is historically verifiable.
So, Bob, maybe the provocative thought for our listeners is this. Next time you reach for that bottle of EVOO, or maybe consider a splash of diluted ACV, think beyond just that single ingredient. Think about the whole plate, the whole pattern of eating.
Right, the synergy of it all.
Exactly. How does that entire dietary pattern contribute to your long-term well-being? And it makes you wonder, doesn't it? What other gems might be hidden in traditional ways of eating that could benefit our health in the future?